Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. So, first bit of news, remember how I mentioned that the art style of Gravity Falls doesn't really mesh with Ben 10, with things like Dipper and Mabel looking so much younger than Ben and Gwen, not to mention their body shapes being so distinct it's insane? So for these videos, I kind of made new avatars in Canva that are kind of closer to the art style of Ben 10 Omniverse, which is what I've been using for, Ben and Gwen. So for the thumbnails, I'm going to be using the original Gravity Falls art because I want to, convey that this is a story that involves Gravity Falls. But for the rest of the series, I'm going to be using these, which I think will help really solve some of the dissonance problems that I personally have been feeling seeing Ben and Gwen next to the Gravity Falls art of Dipper and Mabel, and will especially help solve the whole Wendy being younger in this timeline thing, because just for a reminder, Wendy in this timeline is the same age as Dipper and Mabel, and that's kind of hard to get across if I'm using Wendy's original art. As you're going to notice in this video, I also added some pupils to the Omniverse models of Ben and Gwen, because I honestly thought that they looked better that way, and I saw some things online that kind of had the same vibe. But with all that out of the way, I just wanted to say thank you for watching this video, and if you haven't already watched part 1, definitely watch that next or first, because I explain a lot of stuff that is changed in this version of the story that you're going to need from context to understand what's going on. But without further ado, thank you guys for joining. I'm your captain, ready to take you on a tour, and let's take another step into the strongest Earth in the multiverse. Cheers! Ben, Dipper, Gwen, and Mabel sat across from each other, still tired from the gnome attack the day before, not to mention having to sneak back into the shack without their grunkle or grandfather noticing that their clothing had been shredded by gnomes or ripped apart by tornado force winds. Their summer was already off to a weird start. Something that Ben was honestly excited about, which was why he was more than a little disappointed that today looked to be shaping up so damn normal. Apparently their grunkle wanted to take them on a fishing trip, and Max didn't think it was a bad idea. So we're gonna spend the whole day camped around the lake. Great, Ben grumbled. Not just camp, kid. Floating in the water with nothing to do but talk, Stan replied. Super, Dipper responded. Stan's not great at making things sound good, I know. But trust me, this will be... Ben? Max slowly said, staring down at one of his grandkids, Ben, specifically the bulky watch around his wrist. What's that you got there? He stared closer at it, the logo emblazoned on its face seeming of particular interest to him. Ben locked eyes with Dipper, who frantically looked at Gwen, who shot a look at Mabel. Who finally said, fun, right? Dipper made it. He's great at tech stuff. Mabel smiled. Dipper narrowed his eyes at Mabel before nodding. Yeah, sure did. Cool, right? He smiled tightly. Max stared at the preteens for a beat longer before smiling and shaking his head. Of course, yeah. He patted Dipper on the shoulder. Great job, son. The four preteens let out a sigh of relief as the old man walked away from them, missing the troubled looks on his face as he turned away. The ride over to the lake was quiet, uneventful. It was when they got to the lake that things actually got interesting. People were talking, practically screaming about a monster, especially one old-timer. Dipper leafed through the magazine that he brought with him, the monster's name sounding somewhat familiar. Apparently, it would pay big bucks to get a picture of this thing, to get real proof. And that old guy was rambling about an island that the thing supposedly hung out at, meaning that they likely knew exactly where it would be. And that kind of cash would pay for our investigation. Imagine, any piece of tech we want in our hands like nothing, Dipper snapped. Well, I guess we do need cameras if we're gonna go on stakeouts. Finding out who's after us isn't gonna be easy, Gwen murmured. Plus, we're gonna need transportation if we're gonna check out the places in the journal, and we're probably gonna have to pay for that. Money isn't the worst idea. Monster hunting. Neat. Mabel smirked, glancing over to the two older men who had brought them here. But what about Grunkle Stan and Grandpa Max? We'll figure it out. The boat they want to take us on is small anyway, right? We just need to say we don't want to be cramped and tag team. 2 go with them, 2 go off to find the monster. Easy peasy. Ben grinned, giving a thumbs up to Seuss, who was already ready to help them. Huh, that's a surprisingly good plan, Gwen said, her eyebrows raised. Ben's eye twitched in response. Yeah, I know, doofus. Now all we gotta do is figure out who's going with me and Seuss. What? Gwen asked. Why do you get to... Sea monster, remember? Anyone else with a magic watch that turns them into a monster fish raise their hands. Ben cut Gwen off, the rest of his family pouting as Ben caught up with Seuss. Ben knew he was right. This was going to be an easy day, and after the disaster with the gnomes, he deserved an easy day. Best of all, he was going to be the leader of the group. For once, Gwen wouldn't be leading him around. He was going to get to show off, and he couldn't help but feel brighter. Even the sun beating down on them was beginning to ease up. The clouds must have been heavier than he was expecting. Their ship blended with the clouds above. 6-6 made sure to park it in just the right spot where nobody would be able to see it from the ground. Their ship's measuring screen zoomed in on the lake below, on a boy piling into a fairly large boat with an adult and a girl, and on the boy's arm was a large bulky watch attached to his wrist. The Omnitrix was here, and it was in the hands of a child. This will be even easier than expected. 6-6's voice came through as he and Crab walked to the elevator. Fighting on the water would certainly prove to be a challenge, which was good. He didn't want to make things too easy, after all. Alright, so we have Dipper's 50 cameras, Ben asked. Check, Mabel replied. Awesome boat, walkie-talkie, Ben said, continuing down the list. Check, dude, Seuss replied, patting the ship that they had gotten on short notice, and the device that they would use to keep contact with the duo on the other boat. Ben had only known the man for a couple of days, and Seuss was already starting to be awesome. And of course, snacks for you guys to eat while I'm busy thrashing the thing. Ben smiled as Mabel held up a big bag of trail mix. Alright then, let's hunt a monster. Their ship sailed down the lake. At the rate they were going, it'd only be a little bit before they reached the island the old man was talking about. And that's how you properly hook bait, Grunkle Stan smiled. Gwen grinned in response, but Stan's explanation was so boring that even Max was starting to drift off. She nudged Dipper, who was looking over the bow with his binoculars. Please tell me you have something, Gwen said to Dipper. Well, no monster, and I just lost sight of the boat, Dipper whispered back. What are the odds that they finish this without us? Fairly high. Ben's basically a superhero, so he'll be fine, Gwen said with more confidence than she felt. She shook off the doubt. Her brother wasn't in danger, not from some stupid monster. There was only maybe a 20% chance that the thing was real anyway. But stranger things had happened. The forest was definitely creepier than they thought it was going to be. There was probably a reason that nobody went to this island, which just made Ben all the more excited. It was like they had their own little detective group that he was the leader of. Isn't this awesome? We get the most important part, Ben asked Mabel as she walked side by side with him. What do you mean? Mabel asked. I never get to do stuff on my own. Gwen always has to be the smart one, and only the smart one gets to question all my thoughts. Now, I'm getting to fly solo, Ben grinned. And apparently I'm really good at it. Ben pointed to an open spot in the forest, a spot where the beady white eyes of a creature towering 40 feet above him stared into his soul. Guys, you still got the camera, right? Ben asked, swallowing hard. Sure do, dude. You got this. Ben 10, Mabel smiled, fist-bumping her cousin. Ben smiled at his cousin. He was already starting to get used to the hero name she came up with. Alright, Lake Loser, Ben pumped his fist as he pressed the button on the side of his watch. It's hero time! Ben erupted into a wave of green light, his forearm form walking out of the glow. Just as Ben was getting ready to throw his first punch, the creature came tumbling to the ground, lurching off into the forest as quickly as its now deformed and screeching limbs could handle it. Stepping out of the new dust cloud, two large creatures walked into his sight. 6-6 and Crab had locked eyes on their new target, who had just made himself incredibly clear to them. You. Hand over the Omnitrix and you might yet live, 6-6 growled. Ben glanced at Mabel, who shrugged nervously. Are you sure you're in the right place, buddy? Ben asked, the creature pointing to the hourglass symbol on his forearm shoulder. Ben glanced down at it. What, you mean the Monster Watch? Monster Watch. What else would we expect from a child? These creatures that you transform into are aliens, you fool. Like us, Crab replied next to 6-6. Ben gave Mabel and Seuss a glance, telling them to back up without saying a single word. It was time for him to show just how well he could handle things on his own. Or rather, that was the plan. Ben's first punch was redirected almost immediately by the larger bounty hunter. His second was caught by 6-6, who used the momentum to throw him into the trees. Mabel could only watch helplessly as Ben slowly lost ground and went from dealing blows to taking them. Seuss finally pulled her to a safer spot as they watched Ben get thrown through a cluster of the forest. The girl scratched her head till it hurt. She had no idea what to do. If Dipper was here... Dipper! The walkie-talkie! If he talks about fish one more time, I'm gonna swim with them, Gwen grumbled. Come on, it's not that bad. Kinda fun, Dipper replied. And he was having a good time, all things considered. It had been a while since he had anything that could be considered an actual family trip, especially since Mabel had been his only family for a while. So even if it's Grunkle had been talking about nothing for a while, it was a fun kind of nothing. For you, maybe. My brother's fighting the Loch Ness Monster without me. I can practically feel the trouble coming off of... It's fine, Gwen. He's not alone. He's got Mabel, Dipper replied, Gwen's eye twitching, getting him on edge. Right. Yeah, it's just... I'm the only one who takes care of him, you know? Ever since... She trailed off, quiet enough to make sure Max and Stan couldn't hear her words over Stan's stories. Look, he's a magnet for trouble, and lately I'm the only one who gets him out of it. I'm always pulling him out of the fire, and I don't even know if he knows how to do it himself anymore. Dipper placed a hand on her shoulder. Look, Gwen, we're gonna be here a while. If anything bad happens, I'm sure they'll tell us, but there's no reason to obsess over it, right? Gwen sighed. Dipper was right, but she wasn't sure if she could enjoy it. Maybe it was just her nerves, but all she could focus on was how weird Stan was acting. She could tell he was getting antsy. He kept pulling up to other families who were having more fun than they were, like he was trying to get all of them to learn what fun was. Max's presence was helpful. The old man was a lot calmer than his brother, after all. He was patient in spending time with them, and he managed to keep Stan's worst impulses at bay. And from what she saw, there were more than a few of them. The click on the walkie-talkie was honestly a miracle. For Dipper and Gwen. Gwen reached for it, but she was a second too slow, which meant she had to keep distracting the two adults while Dipper talked. I got it. I'll tell you what they say. Dipper nodded to Gwen. Just relax. I'm sure it's nothing. Gwen took a deep breath before she started staring at her great-uncle. So, that's how you hook bait, huh? I bet you caught some awesome stuff with that. She smiled wavily, as Stan's eyes lit up, immediately clearing his throat to begin his epic tale as Dipper pulled the walkie-talkie to his ear, a small smile on his face at Gwen's clear discomfort. Hey guys, I'm guessing you just found some— Dipper! Mabel's voice on the other end nearly knocked Dipper off the boat. Thankfully, it was only loud enough for him to hear, but it still nearly deafened him. He knew Mabel could get a bit too excited sometimes, so it wasn't exactly surprising. Jeez, look, Mabel, the volume's fine. You don't need to— Dipper, it's crazy. We found the monster, and Ben was ready to fight it, and then aliens dropped out of the sky, and... Aliens? Of all the things that could have happened, Earth had probably been invaded 3 times, 2 of which before Dipper was even born, and he had still never seen an alien. Gwen was right. Ben must have had some seriously bad luck. The worry must have been seeping into Dipper's face since he could already see Gwen's dropping as she stared at him. Mabel, is Ben okay? He has maybe 3 minutes left on forearms, and he's getting beat up really bad, and I don't know what to do, and... Dipper forced his face as calm as possible. Get to the boat, go fast. Try to find us, we'll be in the water. Dipper... Everything's gonna be fine, Mabel. I promise, he said, the last bit more to himself than anyone else as he put his supplies in his bag and grabbed Gwen. Hey, me and Gwen are gonna go for a swim. With our bags. The look on his face told Gwen not to argue. Are you sure? We're in the middle of... Max started. We'll be fine, Grandpa. Shore's right there, and there's tons of kids in the water, Gwen said hopefully. Grandpa Max wasn't like Stan. He needed a good reason if they were going to do anything reckless, so she hoped her argument made it seem not reckless enough for him to let it slide. Stan opened his mouth to object, but Max simply gave the two a kind grin as he waved them off. Dipper barely got out a thank you before Gwen had practically shoved the boy in the water, the pair of them swimming as fast as their bodies could carry them. You just love being a buzzkill, don't you? You hate me spending time with my grandnieces and nephews that much? Stan mumbled. They're mine too, you know. And they'll be back, probably just need to cool off from your 5th story about catching trout. Look on the bright side, maybe you can find a more interesting story before they get back. Max chuckled to himself. Plus, we can keep our shop talk going. It's all business with you, ain't it? Stan asked, pulling a leather journal out from behind him. Well, I narrowed us down to a few options. Ben's arms were getting really, really tired. He wasn't even sure they could do that before now, and he was minorly convinced his lower left one was fractured, because it hurt a heck of a lot more than he thought was possible. Okay, round 5, Ben murmured, slowly getting to his feet. He wasn't counting up the time he had left on his watch, but he could imagine it wasn't long. He was going to have to win this fast, but how? He couldn't think of a single way, and he was surrounded. That was until Crab started sparking, his suit twisting and turning as it crashed to the ground. 6-6 looked over at the culprit. It was Seuss, with a fistful of wire from the creature's suit in hand. He didn't even know how it would work. He didn't even know if it would work. He just reached down at the only opening that the armor had and started pulling. Nobody's better at breaking stuff than me, dude. Seuss gave Ben a grin. Ben, taking advantage of the single opening Seuss's distraction gave him, threw his full weight behind the 3 arms that could still move without trouble, and thrusted them into 6-6's body with a loud plunk, as 6-6 went flying into the trees with enough force to knock down several of them down and kick up a dust cloud. Ben got ready to follow up on his momentum before a look from Mabel shook him out of it. She was freaked out, and that made him freaked out. She didn't think he had this, and if he was being honest, he probably didn't. He only had the stupid watch for a little bit, and he didn't have that many tricks with it. He didn't have a quick win strategy. Honestly, he might have not even had a winning strategy. Seuss, which way is the boat? Ben asked, Seuss casually pointing to its direction, not showing an ounce of fear despite the danger. Ben grabbed the man by his shirt, before running to Mabel and grabbing her by the back of her sweater, as he put all of the strength he could into his legs, forcing himself to jump off the ground and soar toward the ship. Only a couple of feet off the surface of their escape vessel, a blinding red light encompassed them as the 3 landed on the surface of the ship. Ben was now as human as ever as Seuss took the wheel, steering their ship down the water as quick as it could go, leaving the island in the rearview mirror. Seuss was also the one to find the other 2 kids floating in the water, who soon climbed aboard the speeding getaway vehicle to join their siblings. Mabel almost immediately tackled Dipper into a hug, with a smile that took up her entire face. Dipper patted her on the back with a relieved grin. Jeez, we were gone 5 minutes, Mabel, Dipper joked, Mabel jokingly pushing him. Like just having her brother there with her had pushed away every fear that had been circling around her like a vulture. When, though, she rushed to Ben, thankful to find that he was okay, but he didn't react to seeing her. He was just sitting, cross-legged on the deck of the ship, tapping his now red-faced watch. She sat next to him as the boat kept going. Come on. Ben? Come on. Ben! Gwen shook her brother's shoulder, as his eyes locked with hers. The same impatience she had always had seen was there, but it was different. It was like his confidence cracked. 5 minutes. I've had this stupid watch for 5 minutes and I'm already getting outmatched? He scratched his head. I know I'm stronger than this. I mean, did you see what I did with the gnomes? I should have had this. How did things fall apart so quickly? Ben, you can't just... I know. Ben sighed. I know. I need you. I always need you. Can't go for 5 seconds on my own. What? Gwen asked, scooting next to him. Dipper and Mabel watched from a distance, slowly getting closer to the pair, unbeknownst to Ben. Nothing, Ben huffed. Go ahead, solve the problem, like you always do. Jeez, you really are a doofus, Gwen said, Ben looking up at her as she put a hand on his shoulder. I'm your sister, you moron. Of course I'm gonna look after you, especially with how crazy you are, it's my job. I know, not done, Gwen continued. I know you're annoyed by me or whatever, but that's not gonna change. Just like you're never gonna stop looking after me. Ben looked up at her. You don't need looking after, Ben said. You gotta be kidding me. You're half the reason I have fun. You know how much of a stick in the mud I can be. Gwen smiled, her smile half spreading to Ben. Look, Ben, we fight together. We're family. Together we make half a functioning brain cell. She helped Ben to his feet just as the crew saw the aliens following them. 2 spots hanging in the air. They can fly? Mabel said, half numb. Of course they can fly, Ben muttered. Dipper locked eyes with Gwen. They needed a plan and they needed one fast. In the distance they watched a creature bobbing up and down, retreating into a cave. The monster they had come here for. When you guys saw that thing earlier, how was it acting? Dipper asked. Angry, mostly? Mabel responded, the look in Dipper's eyes spreading to Gwen. Seuss? Follow that dinosaur, Gwen shouted. Yes, sir, Mrs. Tenapines, Seuss replied, giving the ship a hard turn. What are we doing? Ben asked shakily to Dipper and Gwen, the 2 book-smart members of the Pines-Tennyson family nodding at each other. You ever heard of a bullfight, Ben? Dipper asked. Well, it's time to wave a red flag. Gwen continued, pulling her family into a huddle, explaining a proper plan. A plan that brought a mischievous look to Ben and Mabel's faces just as the ship crashed into the shore of the cave, directly next to the nearly 40-foot creature they had followed. Dipper's mouth gaped as he snapped a picture of the thing that roared in response, just as Ben's watch flashed green. Not yet, Dipper said, quickly, as all of them crouched as much as possible, trying to get the monster to look past them. It didn't work. The creature slowly inched closer to them. Now? Ben asked, his voice shaking. No, not yet, Gwen replied, hating her own voice. Thankfully, it wouldn't take much longer for the plan to come into motion, the lights of the alien's jetpack flames illuminating the dark, dim cave. Now, she grinned to Ben and Mabel as Mabel slunk inside the cave, and Ben jumped out in the open, catching the attention of both the monsters and aliens. "Alright, hero time!" he shouted, slamming down on his watch, his form disappearing in a flash of green and being replaced by a spectral floating figure. "Ghost freak. Come on, guys. You want me? Here I am." The duo of aliens rushed Ben at the same time, him floating above them, leaving them to chase him higher, all of them scurrying to fight him as he avoided the attacks of the monster. The aliens were so caught up in trying to capture Ben that they barely noticed the other creature in the room, so when 6-6 slashed at Ben and his blade went straight through Ghost Freak's transparent body and into the body of the monster bit down on top of him, thrashing 6-6 up and down the wall, not able to get the creature off of him. Soon after, Crab raised a hose to Ben from his gauntlet, flushing him in a strange green fluid. "Try phasing now, punk," Crab said, his confidence radiating through his robotic tone as he charged forward, his large metal claw only to be nailed in the face with a balloon, his sight getting completely covered in glitter. "And the best part about that is it sticks for weeks," Mabel shouted, pumping her fist in the air at the perfect shot. Crab tried desperately to get the glitter off of him, but to no avail, only for Ben to shove the creature into the monster's leg. Crab got annoyed and tried to escape, but only for the creature to stomp on his body even more before throwing 6-6 to the side hard enough to render him unconscious. It put more weight on Crab's body until the glowing light behind its robotic eyes went off, it too passing out on the ground. Ben inwardly smiled through Ghost Freak's face only for the monster to lunge at him, bashing Ben to the side, before Ben retaliated to the strike with the monster's face. The strike was a lot harder than Ben anticipated. It was even stronger than Ben thought Ghost Freak was, and angrier. He barely even thought of the motion before the rage bubbling inside him made him do it. The creature's head flew off with that single slash, his family watching below with concerned eyes. Thankfully, it wasn't a creature, it was a machine that he could now see who was piloting. The old man. "McGucket?" Ben questioned. Dipper looked up at the crazy old-timer that they had been talking to only a few hours earlier. The conversation with him after they took him back out of the suit was swift. His relationship with his son, apparently that was why he built the thing. It was hardly a story that they all wanted to hear about, especially when at least half of the kids had been avoiding their family for the better part of a day. But what really surprised them was the machine. This guy had apparently built this thing, the entire robot, seemingly from nothing. And it was apparently advanced enough for, well, Stark Industries to make, from the way that it looked. Heck, Ben would be surprised if the guy hadn't worked for Stark Industries or Capsule Corp. Not to mention the fact that when Ben shifted back to normal, finally changing out of his Ghost Freak attire, the guy didn't seem even the least bit surprised, almost like he'd seen something like it before. As McGucket walked over to the unconscious aliens, poking and prodding at their suits, they couldn't help but wonder just who or what this guy was. "You know, I can take these guys with me if you don't mind," McGucket said. "What, like prisoners?" Gwen asked. "Kinda," McGucket responded cheerfully. "Well, we don't really have a way of holding them," Dipper said after a moment of silence. "And we don't want them going after Ben again." Gwen paused. "You aren't going to do anything weird to them, are you?" she asked. "Nah, just being a responsible plumber," McGucket replied cheerfully. "Plumber?" Mabel furrowed her brow. "I think we should just go," Ben replied. Clearly, no matter how smart the man was, he was still nuts. They weren't going to get a thing out of him. The kids went back to Stan and Max for the rest of the day, which was nice. It was actually fun, especially after the day they just had. Ben had even convinced Dipper to just submit the picture they took of the monster anyway, especially since nobody would be able to tell the difference between it and a real thing. So, in a way, it felt like today was a victory. So, this was kind of their victory party. Except, at the end of it, Dipper, instead of finding Ben celebrating, just found him sitting on a curb as the family packed their things back in the car. You good, man?" Dipper asked, sitting next to Ben. "Yeah, it's nothing," Ben said back. "Is it the alien thing? The whole Omnitrix whatever?" Dipper asked. The revelation of the Omnitrix was a lot for Ben. Aliens were definitely not where he thought his summer was going, but that was mostly setting in okay. He figured he could roll with the punches like anyone else, and aliens weren't that different from monsters like he thought. It was more Ghost Freak. When he attacked that monster, it felt wrong, almost like he wasn't the one at the wheel. And fittingly, Ghost Freak freaked him the heck out. but he didn't want to talk about it, so he just smiled to Dipper. Yeah, man, it was the aliens. Whole Omnitrix thing, it was kind of a lot to take in, you know? He said, lying through his teeth. I can't believe I'm actually doing this. A silver-haired girl's eye twitched as she stood in the backstage area of the performance stage. Come on, put on a smile for little old me. A white-haired boy nudged her. We need to get close to these totems, right? So we need to get their attention. You got any other better ideas? The girl looked back to the paper wall with the cipher wheel drawn out in front of it that had been posted to it. She needed this thing's help, this triangle, Bill's cipher, and apparently he wanted something in return. So she had to deliver, which meant she did have to get their attention if she was going to capture them. Fine. As they stepped out on stage, an announcer blared in her ears. Ladies and gentlemen, we're proud to present to the world the wonderful Little Gideon, and for the first time, his assistant, the magnificent Charmcaster. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this video. Yes, I'm using the reboot version of Charmcaster's design for this universe, largely just because I wanted her to grow up alongside the team, whereas she's already kind of an adult in the original series. We saw that the show kind of lost track of what to do with Charmcaster after Ultimate Alien, and honestly they really didn't know what to do with her character after the original series, but I have ideas for the character that I'm kind of excited about, and so she kind of needed to start here. And also, yeah, I gave Gideon one of the redesigned assets too. And everything I said at the start of the video about Dipper and Mabel's designs applies to Gideon as well. Oh, that's it. I just want to say thank you guys so much again, and thanks for watching. I'll see you all next time.